Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
This week on Red, White, and Blue, we welcome New York Times author and columnist Gail Collins. She's written a new book. It's called As Texas Goes, How the Lone Star State Hijacked the American Agenda. It's going to be interesting, David.
Something tells me I might be embracing the themes
I think
of the book. But Gail, I have to start off by saying, say what you will about those Texas politicians, Phil Gramm and Dick Armey and Rick Perry and George Bush. Not a one of them would transport their dog on top of their car. So I have to ask you, do you know why any of those politicians are supporting Mitt Romney who did that crazy thing?
It's so deeply ironic because Mitt Romney is the least Texas-likely politician I have ever met in my entire life. The fact that Texas put him over the top was the deepest of ironies. I just cannot imagine Texas selecting Mitt Romney as their presidential choice.
But you have to tell us a little bit about the dog story because people may not know.
Oh, well, the dog story is famous now in legend. It goes back to 2007 when he was running the first time, and the Boston Globe had this huge takeout about him in which they said, among other things, that at one time he was taking the family on vacation to Canada, 12-hour drive, designated the rest stops. You could not stop anywhere that wasn't designated. Put the dog on the roof of the car in a cage, and they took off. The dog didn't seem to like it because he did develop diarrhea, and the kids started going, gross, gross, gross. So Mitt Romney pulled off the highway to a non-designated rest stop in which he hosed down the dog, hosed down the car, jumped back in the car, and got back on the highway without anybody else ever being allowed out of the car. And this was presented as an example of his good management skills, but instantly everybody said, why is there a dog on the roof of the car? And if he had only said, I had 5 kids, I was out of my mind, I would have let it go forever. But he said the dog liked the fresh air. And that was just sort of it.
Well, by the way, that could be true. Because I will tell you, Gail, when I drive my car with my Akita, she likes the window open, and she'll
I
go
challenge you to put the
out.
Akita on top of the roof.
She weighs too much. I can't lift her. But anyway, you've written a fascinating book. A little bit tongue-in-cheek, I think, but that's okay. You had some things to say about Texas that were not necessarily complimentary. But the first thing I wanted to talk to you about, couldn't you have written a similar book about New York or California, not with the same areas, but where there are issues and questions, because New York is certainly a leading state, and we end up following a lot of what happens in New York, just like California, and Texas has kind of fit into that triumvirate. So they all got issues.
When I go to New York and California with this book, which I have done, that's the same question they ask. What about New York and California?
They ought to be written about.
Yeah, and I say, well, they're both very important states, but New York's flat in population, California is having terrible economic problems, and this is the Texas moment in so many ways. It's booming demographically. It's doing really well economically as far as job creation. And its politics are, I would argue, propelling the national agenda.
And there's a critic of yours, a review, I believe it was Mr. Groves, and he says that, you're really exploring national characteristics that, and you're kind of, pointing at Texas when, hey, Texas did not embrace the secessionist movement exactly.
I could be saying, as Alabama goes, so goes the country, but nobody would believe me if I did that.
And as he indicates, all of the major politicians who you look upon with disfavor, they're from somewhere else. They didn't, we didn't welcome them. They just came here.
Oh, you did welcome them, I would say. Phil Gramm. All that money people gave Phil Gramm to run for president people from Texas gave him to run. That was a welcome.
Well, but so the criticism
really
is you're really disappointed with the direction of the country, Gail. Why? And you're using Texas to exploit your dissatisfaction.
Well, I would argue that uniquely in the country, if you look, and what sort of interested me about this whole thing was when I was watching the Rick Perry Tea Party things, which were not really secession calls, but I personally did not feel the love as another state at that point in time.
I can understand that.
And I was thinking, why are these guys so angry at the federal government? And I went back and made a list of all the major things that had happened over the last 30 years, like the savings and loan crisis, the bank deregulation, although there were many, many, many fingers in there. I would say Phil Gramm's was possibly the very biggest thumb of all. No Child Left Behind, totally based on the Texas education experience. Energy, environment, you just sort of go down the list, and you wind up saying, wow, Texas has had a disproportionate impact on the national agenda. It's really, really politically powerful. And it's so angry about it. I don't, it's hard to understand.
Well, but I think if you look at the Tea Party movement and Governor Perry's involvement with that, I think Governor Perry sensed the growth of that movement, at least in the Republican Party, and saw that as an opportunity for himself to number one, make sure he got reelected governor against Kay Bailey Hutchison, and then boost him to run for president. Of course, that didn't work out too well. The rhetoric, and you go back and look at Rick Perry's political career. Of course, he started out as a Democrat.
As did everybody, basically.
Almost everybody. But
did you? I didn't find it. Did you?
No. That hasn't happened.
No, I was never a Democrat. I've been a Republican forever, and I'm proud of it. But I think that Rick kind of got himself involved because the movement was there and he thought it needed leadership, so he was going to help provide that. But there are other issues that we have, and one of the things that you talk about in your book, you talk about some of the challenges that Texas faces. And again, you could probably write that about every state.
Well, every state is not producing 10% of the future workforce of America, which is what you've got right now with Texas because of both its huge size and its very, very rapid growth rate. And one of the things I tried to do in the book was to think about states' rights and to look at Texas and to see what things Texas was doing that really were Texas's own personal business and we had no right to interfere, and what things that Texas did really did slosh over the borders and affect everybody else. If you're producing 10% of the future workforce of America, I think we all nationally have an interest in making sure that these are children that get good health care and that they're well educated, because they're 10% of the future workforce of America.
And they're forced to buy the textbooks because of the
everybody
textbook
in the country is affected by the Texas decisions on textbooks because the market is so huge and because for a very, very, very long time until very recently, Texas controlled the books that its schools bought in a very peculiar way that gave the State Board of Education wildly disproportionate influence on what's in the school books in America today.
Well, of course, the conservatives on the state school board would argue that what they've only done is really balance things, because in the past the textbooks were dominated by liberal thinking from the East and West Coasts.
Yeah, and what I would argue in the end, people outside of Texas who I try really hard to educate, that, for instance, I swear to you, every place that I go, when somebody gets up and complains about Texans per se, as opposed to the politics of the state, I always point out that if there was a hurricane in Newark, New Jersey, I doubt New York City would as readily have opened its arms to 200,000 refugees as Houston did. And then, of course, after a while, people say, well, if they're so nice, why are their politics so crazy? We go around a little bit of a circle there. But
yeah, we had a Democratic mayor then.
But we also had a Republican county judge, and they worked in partnership, David, to be fair.
It's absolutely true. I think that part of it in Texas is it's partly that great affinity for the idea that you used to be a republic, and that therefore it gives you some kind of special independence because of that 9 big years of republicness. Vermont was a republic for 14 years. It never comes up in Vermont at all. I have never, ever, ever heard.
Because they don't have the Alamo. Maybe that's it.
Maybe it's the Alamo. The whole Alamo thing I found just so fascinating. When I went down there, my 2 thoughts when I went through the Alamo, which I must admit I hadn't thought about since Davy Crockett on TV, was A, what brave men these are, and B, what a bad plan this was. They could have gone out. They could have lived to fight another day. That was my non-Texan response.
Or did you find also fascinating that the Alamo's in the middle of downtown San Antonio?
Well, that was unexpected. It's so little, too. I didn't expect that. The gift shop is like the biggest part of the Alamo.
So were you surprised, Gail, when you found the mother of our future, the Democrats' future, the Castro brothers of San Antonio, saying that, her understanding of the Alamo and those people occupying the Alamo that died there, where there were a bunch of drunks and
imperialists,
slave owners, and debtors.
Well, I did find, as I trotted around the state, that although there's a Texas vision of the Alamo, that the Mexican-American Texans, who will soon be the majority in 10 years or so down the line, don't have nearly as affectionate and warm a feeling about the Alamo story as the old Anglo population does. I mean, they see it as sort of a diss on their own history.
Well, so was the mother, Rosie Castro, is she your basic left-winger?
You know, I didn't get to meet Rosie Castro, but I was thinking that if Barack Obama had been in Texas, I could imagine that, seeing his mother out there with a sign at some point, say, down with, Alamo imperialism. And the Alamo's a very, sort of lightning rod of feeling. And can I say one more thing about the Alamo?
Please. Sure.
The victory or death thing, that letter from Travis, the victory or death letter, which George W. Bush sent to the Ryder Cup golf team when they were playing Europe, to me, that whole Texas feeling of taking these wildly improbable stands that could very well lead to disaster for some point of principle. If you look at Lyndon Johnson and his presidency, and you see what he did with the Civil Rights Act, despite knowing what a disaster it was going to be for his party, and then what he did with the war in Vietnam, despite having very good suspicions this too would be a disaster, you sort of see the two sides of that Texas Alamo tradition, the great, amazing side and the incredible disaster side.
So we know, Gail, that Texas is one of the leading creator of jobs. We know that the housing is affordable in Texas. We know Chief Executive Magazine rates Texas the top place for business for the last 7 years.
All the places that rate it, but you go on and on and on, and it's like one of those irritating kids at the valedictorian session of,
Yes. So all these things that are pluses about Texas. We have influx of population because things are affordable. People can afford to live here.
That's true. Housing is affordable, and that is a huge plus for Texas. But when we went through this with Governor Perry, his presentation to the world was Texas is growing all these jobs because it's got very, 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 very low taxes and because it has very, very, very little regulation. Now, if those were the two keys to the secret sauce, Mississippi would be running the universe. It's not unusual. There's a bunch of states that aren't doing very well at all that have those two things going for them. I think what Texas has is it's been underpopulated. It's having its moment. It was slow compared to the rest of the country to really grab onto the non-exporting of precious metals and goods and oil and energy part of the economy. And when it did, it boomed. It's got a very young population. It's near Mexico on the border. It's got the energy industry. It's got a whole bunch of things. But I'm not arguing that it's not having quite a great time economically. I'm just arguing that.
And don't you give credit to that to Rick Perry? Isn't he the reason we were having all these great things?
Oh, it is such an accident that Rick Perry is here. Rick Perry could be sitting, on his ranch, and you would never know the difference. And I think probably frequently was sitting on his ranch. But anyway, he's got nothing to do with it.
So, Gary, I don't know whether you missed this or not. Gary did because he didn't attend the Republican convention, as far as I know. But they have a platform.
That's
okay?
right.
They have a platform which says that the separation of church and state is a myth. They continue to say that we should reduce funding for public education. They say we should teach creationist angles in science classes. They want to repeal the Voting Rights Act. And I think you probably could guess what they have to say about homosexuals. So how, you, as Gary said, you're tongue-in-cheek. But I would say this is a dangerous group of people, these extremists, these regressives that are in charge of the Republican Party.
I like in the most positive possible light to say the difference between the right wing and the left wing in this country is actually a difference between people who regard themselves as being from empty places and those who are from crowded places. I like this division because it doesn't suggest either side is the spawn of Satan. And if you're from a crowded place, you can see every day the useful things government does, and you really appreciate government. If you're from an empty place, you don't see the point. Empty place politicians don't want to improve government, they want to get rid of it. Texans are under the impression, despite the fact that 80% of them live in metropolitan areas, that they are from an empty place. And I think that colors, besides the Republic and the Alamo and everything else, deeply colors their feelings.
That's because we have freeways, and we're always.
It takes so long for you to get anywhere that it
you feel alone.
To that
you
thought.
feel alone.
But the mentality also that you mentioned in your book is that it's not unheard of for Texans to drive 300 miles to go to a football game, and you talk about that up in the Northeast. It's just that wouldn't happen.
No, you don't.
No
it's
chance.
a totally different feeling. But I would say it's sort of an imaginary feeling. But yet it's right there. And that's part of what propels this sort of Tea Party, like we hate all government, kind of feeling. And why it is that people who hate all government are so obsessed with controlling the sex life of people is something I have still yet to figure out.
Well, I think it is fair to say that that sincere feeling is an inconsistency. If you want government out of your life, then you don't want the government in your life. It doesn't make sense. One of the things David,
we're in agreement.
Yeah, on that one it doesn't. It may not make sense. It is what it is. David forgot to tell you one of the things that the Republican State Convention did pass. Very interesting. They came out for a guest worker program nationally for immigration. That we got to bring people out of the shadows. I thought it was a major progress on the issue because the attitude in the past had been basically, we get rid of everybody, we do nothing. So I thought that was very significant and a recognition of reality that people are here.
If the guest worker program is not united with other stuff to bring people into citizenship, I would say it's kind of a semi-thing. But I do want to say that one of the ways Texas, you would hope, would be leading the nation is in bringing forth the huge new Hispanic American population that's growing up, that's soon going to be the majority here. Texas, I think, has an openness to the whole immigrant experience that some other states I could name are not great at. It has the resources, if it would deign to raise its taxes, to educate those young people really, really well. It could lead the way. It could be great.
That's good. But you're talking about raising taxes, Gail. And we've seen, we have watched what raising taxes has done. The example being California, dominated by public sector unions. They want to raise taxes by another $16 billion.
California's problem is that they can't raise taxes because of the strange way that they have fixed
Well, they already got high
income
taxes, right?
It's not that Texas has very low taxes. It has very low taxes for very high income people. I'm just, if you're low income in Texas, you pay about 13% of your income in state taxes.
Actually, the problem with the tax system in Texas now is we devised a tax system for a 20th century economy, and that economy has now changed, just like California, where a lot of the economy is developed through services. And like in Texas, we don't charge sales tax for most services, so they're untaxed. So basically, those are like tax exemptions when you talk about them.
The crony capitalists of Texas will not permit anything more than
I have
sales
noticed
taxes.
the number of exemptions that you've got on your business taxes in Texas are not.
So stay with California.
Low, flat, and broad. That's my tax.
Gail, we just had this immigration ruling by the Supreme Court, and we have Obama trying to offer his own Dream Act.
By edict, by the way.
True. However, he's certainly an imperious fellow. Some would say
King
Gary.
King Barack.
Yeah. I find him to be somewhat sweet-tempered.
But Gary, but Gail, is it the future of Texas, so long as the Republicans continue to be in this anti-immigrant form that they've been in for a long while, just like California, where it's all over. A Republican can't win a statewide election in California because Hispanics turned on them with a vengeance.
Well,
isn't that our future, hopefully?
In theory it is, although I must say the state legislature is really going out of its way to make it as difficult as possible for new people to come in and register and vote in Texas.
Oh, wait a minute. That's also a misnomer. We have motor voter. It was applied to everyone. You get a license, you get a voter registration card, and the idea that you have to show an photo ID to vote, it makes perfect sense because you got to show a photo ID to cash a check, sometimes use a credit card, to get on an airplane. I mean, all these things. Get in the courthouse at times. So why shouldn't you be able to prove who you are when you vote?
Well,
what is the big deal?
If I remember correctly, a photo ID from, say, the University of Texas as a student doesn't count for, but...
Well...
but the gun
carry permit
does,
that
which
works
is good.
Very well
sure.
Indeed.
And so, we should, and there is, I think, a provision in the bill that they passed, David, to help people get IDs that don't have driver's licenses.
I do remember reading the other day, too, that Texas spends about 4 times as much stripping people off the voter rolls as it does trying to encourage to help them vote.
Well, that's because we have a population that moves, and so once you move, you should not be staying on the voter rolls. You should get on the voter rolls of where you're living.
The amount of voter fraud in this country is so tiny compared to the paranoia about voter fraud in this country. It's absolutely stupendous.
Well, there was another of the people that reviewed your book that said that, what you were describing are the fissures in American society, and on one side are those that want to control other people, on the other side are the victims and the left out and that sort of thing. Does that sum up your views of what conservatives are about?
I like to go for that empty places, crowded places.
You're
thing.
insisting on this.
It makes people feel much
Dave
better
wants
about
to put
each
words
other.
in your mouth.
I'm
Okay,
gonna
I
go
got to
that
ask
way.
you this. You said in your book, Houston is ugly. Now, you've spent some time here. When
That
you
was
drove in,
unfortunate. I
now, I
should have said
understand.
physically really unattractive.
Okay,
But it's a lovely city. It's a great city.
You drove toward downtown. Downtown actually looks pretty nice. The University of Houston campus, nice campus. There are nice areas in town. It's not the prettiest city in America or in the world. Somewhere in the middle, I think, to be fair. So you may want to pull back on that one.
What'd you see? What? I mean, I know you saw a bunch of strip centers, right?
Well, there was,
No.
oh my God, driving around.
Did you come on 45
oh,
or 59?
Lord. Both on one different time or another. They are both. I mean, just any way that you go around in this part. And I know nothing of. I've never driven without help in Houston, and I know nothing of the highways names. But all I can tell you is every one of them. My Lord, they go on forever, and there is nothing but one strip mall after another, and it's very depressing. Although, again, Houston has incredible energy and wonderful, wonderful people, and still remember the Katrina thing. And
in a very, by the way, in a very open city.
Yes.
Welcoming to newcomers.
Texas in general is very open and very welcoming, and
So
the
that's a
people are
plus.
very
Until you start
lovely.
voting against them.
Well, there's that, but still empty and crowded. That's why it happens.
There
So I have to ask you because I read the biography of William Henry Harris.
Bless
And
you.
Yeah, and I don't
bless
want to
you.
get in, and all that. I know you have this Texas book to sell and all that, but you mentioned something in that book that I wondered if you would say it suggests the dysfunction of today's politics, because I saw in that book where there were 350 odd weeklies and dailies that people were getting in the mail, 55 monthly period, and people's opinions were very hardened. They all went into their own partisan, camps, and they had an 80% turnout.
They loved it. It was the worst election. The 1840 election was the dumbest, craziest, stupidest, most idiotic election in American history, and the people really enjoyed it. 80% of the people turned out to vote.
And so that's what's happening here.
Well, we're not going to have 80% turnout.
It's not going to be as much
Well, I know,
fun.
but everyone is
We know
dividing
they
up.
had parades. They rolled balls from city to city. They sang things. They drank a lot. They had a really good time, and that's what.
So maybe you should write a column and suggest to the Obama and Romney campaigns, instead of spending all the money on television, spend their money on parades and rolling balls and making the campaign fun again, as opposed to this TV war.
Oh, well, no more TV? I don't know about that. That would be pretty shocking.
Just makes the actually campaign among the people.
Well, but, do you not see that the politics today are somewhat similar to that, in that everybody's in camps, everybody has hard opinions about each other?
Well, it is also true that I found, looking around American history in general, that whenever you've got a time that you've got a ton of undercapitalized, that's underfunded media, like a town that has 25 or 30 newspapers, but they've all got 2 pages, there's one guy cranking them out, it gets really, really shrill because everybody's trying to be noticed. They want to be the one of the 25 or 30 that manages to hang in there. And with the web now, with the internet, it's pretty much the same thing.
Go ahead.
Can
I ask you this? But you're in the newspaper business. You write a column for the New York Times. What is the future of the newspaper business in America? Should we be concerned?
For speaking of the Times, I feel pretty sanguine about the future of the Times and the national media. What really worries me is the healthy future of local media, places that cover state legislatures, places that cover local government, because that's where around the country in many places you do see a lot of struggle. And there's no place that's taking over. I thought the web would take this over. I thought you'd have all kinds of fantastic local government sites with people reporting, new stuff, and you're not seeing nearly as much of that as I was hoping.
Yeah, and I think you really kind of nailed it. You don't have the coverage. So if you don't have the coverage, where do people really get information? And maybe that's why in the last primary, David, we had a 12% statewide turnout of both parties. That's it. 12%. It's pathetic. It's
very worrisome, and I don't know how you make your decision except by party labels. And it used to be that on the lower levels in state and local government, people didn't care that much about party labels. You sort of voted for the guy because there's no partisan way to pick up the garbage or whatever.
Right.
But it's very hard now to know these things in some parts of the country because you don't have a really active local media.
Well, Gail, we only have a minute before we all have to go outside and sweat some more. So why don't you tell us what the reaction has been in Texas to this book in our last 45 seconds or so?
Well, a guy did call me up in New York and say he was going to stuff a rattlesnake down my throat. That was, I would say, the most extreme response.
Not an armadillo?
Live or
Not an armadillo.
dead?
Well, he didn't say.
Okay.
It didn't sound good, though. But in general, I would say Texans are always welcoming people, and I'm going to rely on their
You
hospitality.
got a good sense of humor. You know, you can make fun of yourself.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I laugh at
so.
Gary all the time.
Yeah, that's what we do. Well, Gail, thank you so much
Pleasure
for
to be
coming.
here.
A fascinating book.
Thank you.
Come back sometime.
Thanks.
We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, Red, White, and Blue. Read about our guests. Watch the shows along with our follow-up discussion. And until next time, get informed and get active.